The Siege of Vicksburg. A comprehensive analysis. The Siege of Vicksburg, fought from May 18 to July 4, 1863, was one of the most significant military campaigns of the American Civil War. This pivotal battle not only demonstrated the strategic brilliance of Union General Ulysses S. Grant, but also marked a turning point in the war, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two and giving the Union control over the Mississippi River. The siege was a culmination of a series of battles and maneuvers that highlighted the complexities of military strategy, the resilience of soldiers, and the profound impact of geography on warfare. This article aims to provide a comprehensive analysis of the Siege of Vicksburg, exploring its historical context, the key figures involved, the strategic importance of Vicksburg, the military tactics employed, the experiences of soldiers and civilians, and the long-term consequences of the Union victory. By delving into these aspects, we can gain a deeper understanding of why the Siege of Vicksburg is often regarded as one of the most critical engagements of the Civil War. Historical context. The American Civil War, a nation divided. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a conflict born out of deep-seated divisions between the northern and southern states. The primary point of contention was the issue of slavery, which had become increasingly polarizing in the decades leading up to the war. The southern states, whose economies were heavily reliant on agriculture and slave labor, sought to preserve their way of life, while the northern states, which were more industrialized and had largely abolished slavery, aimed to prevent its expansion into new territories. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, who opposed the expansion of slavery, was the final straw for many southern states. In response, 11 southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. The Civil War officially began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina, the western theater of the Civil War. While much of the early focus of the Civil War was on the eastern theater, particularly in Virginia, the western theater was equally significant. The western theater encompassed a vast area, including the states of Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of Kentucky and Georgia. Control of the Mississippi River was a strategic priority for both the Union and the Confederacy. The Mississippi River served as a vital transportation route, connecting the northern states to the Gulf of Mexico. For the Union, gaining control of the river would effectively split the Confederacy in two, cutting off supplies and reinforcements to the western states. For the Confederacy, maintaining control of the river was crucial for maintaining their supply lines and communication between the eastern and western parts of the Confederacy. The importance of Vicksburg. Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a key stronghold for the Confederacy. Located on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, Vicksburg was often referred to as the Gibraltar of the Confederacy due to its formidable defenses and strategic location. The city was a major supply depot and a critical link between the eastern and western parts of the Confederacy. For the Union, capturing Vicksburg was essential to achieving their goal of controlling the Mississippi River. However, the city's natural defenses, combined with the Confederate fortifications, made it a challenging target. The Union had attempted several campaigns to capture Vicksburg in 1862, but all had ended in failure. It was not until General Ulysses S. Grant took command of the Union forces in the Western Theater that a successful strategy was devised. Key figures. Union leadership. General Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was one of the most prominent Union generals during the Civil War and would later become the 18th President of the United States. Grant's military career was marked by his tenacity, strategic acumen, and ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Prior to the Siege of Vicksburg, Grant had achieved significant victories at Fort Donelson and Shiloh, earning him the trust of President Abraham Lincoln. Grant's approach to the Vicksburg campaign was characterized by his willingness to take risks and his determination to achieve his objectives. He understood the importance of Vicksburg and was committed to capturing the city, even if it meant enduring a prolonged siege. Grant's leadership during the Vicksburg campaign solidified his reputation as one of the Union's most effective generals. Admiral David Dixon Porter. Admiral David Dixon Porter played a crucial role in the Vicksburg campaign as the commander of the Union Navy's Mississippi River Squadron. Porter's fleet was responsible for supporting Grant's army by transporting troops, providing naval gunfire support, and maintaining control of the river. Porter's cooperation with Grant was instrumental in the success of the campaign. Porter's naval forces were involved in several key engagements during the campaign, including the running of the Vicksburg batteries and the Battle of Grand Gulf. His ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Mississippi River and coordinate with Grant's army demonstrated the importance of joint operations in achieving military objectives. Confederate leadership. General John C. Pemberton. General John C. Pemberton was the Confederate commander responsible for the defense of Vicksburg. Pemberton, a native of Pennsylvania, had chosen to fight for the Confederacy due to his marriage to a Southern woman and his ties to the South. Despite his loyalty to the Confederate cause, Pemberton's leadership during the Vicksburg campaign was often criticized. Pemberton's decision to concentrate his forces within the defenses of Vicksburg, rather than engaging Grant's army in the field, was a controversial one. While the city's defenses were formidable, Pemberton's strategy left him isolated and vulnerable to a siege. His inability to effectively coordinate with other Confederate commanders, particularly General Joseph E. Johnston, further complicated the defense of Vicksburg. General Joseph E. Johnston was one of the most experienced Confederate commanders and was tasked with relieving Vicksburg during the siege. Johnston's approach to the campaign was cautious, and he was reluctant to engage Grant's army directly. Johnston believed that the best course of action was to gather a large force and strike at Grant's supply lines, rather than attempting to break the siege directly. However, Johnston's cautious approach and lack of coordination with Pemberton ultimately hindered the Confederate efforts to relieve Vicksburg. Despite his reputation as a skilled tactician, Johnston's inability to effectively support Pemberton contributed to the fall of Vicksburg. The strategic importance of Vicksburg. The Mississippi River, a lifeline for the Confederacy. The Mississippi River was the lifeblood of the Confederacy, serving as a critical transportation route for goods, troops, and supplies. Control of the river allowed the Confederacy to maintain communication and supply lines between the eastern and western theaters of the war. The loss of the Mississippi River would effectively split the Confederacy in two, isolating Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas from the rest of the southern states. For the Union, gaining control of the Mississippi River was a key strategic objective. The Anaconda Plan, devised by Union General Winfield Scott, called for a naval blockade of the southern coastline and the capture of the Mississippi River to strangle the Confederacy's economy and military capabilities. The capture of Vicksburg was essential to achieving this goal. Vicksburg's strategic location on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River made it a natural fortress. The city's defenses were further strengthened by a series of fortifications, including artillery batteries, trenches, and earthworks. The Confederate forces under Pemberton had worked tirelessly to fortify the city, making it one of the most heavily defended positions in the Confederacy. The geography of Vicksburg presented a significant challenge for any attacking force. The city was surrounded by steep bluffs, swamps, and dense forests, making it difficult for an army to approach and assault. The Union had previously attempted to capture Vicksburg through direct assaults and naval bombardments, but these efforts had been repulsed with heavy casualties. The economic and psychological impact of Vicksburg. The fall of Vicksburg would have significant economic and psychological consequences for both the Union and the Confederacy. For the Union, capturing Vicksburg would not only achieve a key strategic objective but also boost morale and demonstrate the effectiveness of their military leadership. For the Confederacy, the loss of Vicksburg would be a devastating blow, both in terms of military strategy and public morale. The economic impact of losing Vicksburg would be felt throughout the Confederacy. The city was a major supply depot and transportation hub, and its loss would disrupt the flow of goods and supplies to the Confederate armies. Additionally, the fall of Vicksburg would open the Mississippi River to Union control, allowing for the free movement of troops and supplies and further isolating the western Confederate states. The Vicksburg Campaign, a series of battles and maneuvers. Grant's initial attempts to capture Vicksburg in late 1862 and early 1863, General Ulysses S. Grant made several attempts to capture Vicksburg. These efforts included a series of unsuccessful assaults and maneuvers, including the Chickasaw Bayou Expedition and the Yazoo Pass Expedition. Despite these setbacks, Grant remained determined to capture the city. One of the key challenges Grant faced was the difficulty of approaching Vicksburg from the north. The city's defenses were strongest on the northern side, and the terrain made it difficult for an army to maneuver. Grant realized that a direct assault on Vicksburg from the north would be costly and likely unsuccessful. Instead, he began to consider alternative approaches, including a plan to bypass Vicksburg by moving his army down the Mississippi River and approaching the city from the south. The Bayou Expeditions, a test of endurance. In early 1863, Grant launched a series of Bayou expeditions in an attempt to find a viable route to approach Vicksburg from the south. These expeditions involved navigating through the swamps and bayous of the Mississippi Delta, a challenging and grueling task for the Union soldiers. The Yazoo Pass Expedition, which took place in February and March 1863, was one of the most notable of these efforts. The goal of the expedition was to bypass Vicksburg by cutting a channel through the Yazoo Pass and approaching the city from the northeast. However, the expedition was plagued by difficulties, including treacherous terrain, Confederate resistance, and logistical challenges. Despite their efforts, the Union forces were unable to achieve their objective, and the expedition ultimately failed. The Steele's Bayou expedition, which took place in March 1863, was another attempt to find a route to Vicksburg. This expedition involved navigating through the narrow and winding waterways of the Mississippi Delta, with the goal of approaching Vicksburg from the west. However, the expedition was met with fierce Confederate resistance and was forced to turn back. Despite the failures of these expeditions, Grant remained undeterred. He continued to search for a viable route to approach Vicksburg, and his persistence would eventually pay off. The running of the Vicksburg batteries. One of the most daring and risky maneuvers of the Vicksburg campaign was the running of the Vicksburg batteries by Admiral David Dixon Porter's fleet. In April 1863, Porter's fleet of gunboats and transports successfully navigated past the Confederate artillery batteries at Vicksburg, under cover of darkness. This bold move allowed Grant to transport his army across the Mississippi River and approach Vicksburg from the south. The running of the Vicksburg batteries was a critical moment in the campaign. It demonstrated the importance of naval support in achieving military objectives and allowed Grant to execute his plan to approach Vicksburg from the south. The success of this maneuver was a testament to the skill and bravery of Porter's sailors and the effectiveness of joint operations between the Union Army and Navy. The Battle of Port Gibson. With his army now on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, Grant began his advance towards Vicksburg. The first major engagement of this phase of the campaign was the Battle of Port Gibson, fought on May 1, 1863. The battle took place near the town of Port Gibson, Mississippi, and was a decisive Union victory. The Battle of Port Gibson was significant because it allowed Grant to establish a foothold on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River and begin his advance towards Vicksburg. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John S. Bowen, were unable to halt Grant's advance, and the Union Army continued its march towards Vicksburg. The Battle of Raymond and the capture of Jackson. Following the victory at Port Gibson, Grant's army continued its advance towards Vicksburg. The next major engagement was the Battle of Raymond, fought on May 12, 1863. The battle took place near the town of Raymond, Mississippi, and was another Union victory. The Battle of Raymond was significant because it allowed Grant to continue his advance towards Vicksburg and cut off Confederate reinforcements from the east. Following the battle, Grant's army captured the state capital of Jackson, Mississippi, on May 14, 1863. The capture of Jackson was a major blow to the Confederacy, as it disrupted their supply lines and communications. The Battle of Champion Hill. The Battle of Champion Hill, fought on May 16, 1863, was one of the most significant engagements of the Vicksburg campaign. The battle took place near the town of Champion Hill, Mississippi, and was a decisive Union victory. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John C. Pemberton, were unable to halt Grant's advance, and the Union Army continued its march towards Vicksburg. The Battle of Champion Hill was significant because it effectively decided the outcome of the Vicksburg campaign. The Confederate forces were forced to retreat towards Vicksburg, and Grant's army was able to continue its advance towards the city. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of Grant's strategy and the determination of his troops. The Battle of Big Black River Bridge. Following the victory at Champion Hill, Grant's army continued its advance towards Vicksburg. The next major engagement was the Battle of Big Black River Bridge, fought on May 17, 1863. The battle took place near the Big Black River, and was another Union victory. The Battle of Big Black River Bridge was significant because it allowed Grant's army to cross the Big Black River and continue its advance towards Vicksburg. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John S. Bowen, were unable to halt Grant's advance, and the Union Army continued its march towards the city. The Siege of Vicksburg begins by May 18, 1863. Grant's army had reached the outskirts of Vicksburg. The Union forces began to encircle the city, cutting off all supply lines and communication. The Siege of Vicksburg had begun. The siege was a grueling and protracted affair, lasting for over 6 weeks. The Union forces, under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant, maintained a tight blockade around the city, cutting off all supplies and reinforcements. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John C. Pemberton, were trapped within the city's defenses, with no hope of relief. The assaults on Vicksburg. In an attempt to break the siege, Grant ordered a series of assaults on the Confederate defenses. The first assault took place on May 19, 1863, and was repulsed with heavy Union casualties. The second assault, on May 22, 1863, was also unsuccessful, with the Union forces suffering even greater losses. Despite the failure of these assaults, Grant remained determined to capture Vicksburg. He realized that a prolonged siege would be necessary to force the Confederate forces to surrender. The Union Army began to dig trenches and construct siege works, gradually tightening the noose around the city life during the siege. The siege of Vicksburg was a harrowing experience for both the soldiers and the civilians trapped within the city. The Confederate soldiers, under constant bombardment from Union artillery, endured harsh conditions and dwindling supplies. Food and water became scarce, and disease began to spread among the troops. The civilians of Vicksburg also suffered greatly during the siege. Many took refuge in caves and makeshift shelters to escape the constant shelling. Food supplies ran low, and the people of Vicksburg were forced to endure extreme hardship. The siege took a heavy toll on the morale of both the soldiers and the civilians, and the situation within the city became increasingly desperate. The surrender of Vicksburg by early July 1863, the situation within Vicksburg had become untenable. The Confederate forces, under the command of General John C. Pemberton, were running out of food and supplies, and the morale of the troops was at an all-time low. On July 3, 1863, Pemberton requested a meeting with Grant to discuss terms of surrender. After a series of negotiations, Pemberton agreed to surrender Vicksburg on July 4, 1863. The surrender was a significant victory for the Union and marked the end of the siege of Vicksburg. The Confederate forces were paroled, and the Union Army took control of the city. The aftermath of the siege. The impact on the Civil War. The fall of Vicksburg was a turning point in the Civil War. The Union victory gave them control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. This strategic achievement was a major blow to the Confederate war effort and significantly weakened their ability to wage war. The capture of Vicksburg also boosted Union morale and demonstrated the effectiveness of General Ulysses S. Grant's leadership. Grant's success in the Vicksburg campaign solidified his reputation as one of the Union's most capable generals and paved the way for his eventual promotion to command of all Union armies. The human cost. The siege of Vicksburg was a costly engagement for both sides. The Union forces suffered approximately 4,800 casualties, while the Confederate forces suffered around 3,000 casualties. The civilians of Vicksburg also endured significant hardship, with many losing their homes and livelihoods as a result of the siege. The human cost of the siege was a stark reminder of the brutality of war and the sacrifices made by those who fought and lived through it. The experiences of the soldiers and civilians during the siege would leave a lasting impact on their lives and the collective memory of the Civil War. The long-term consequences. The fall of Vicksburg had long-term consequences for both the Union and the Confederacy. For the Union, the victory at Vicksburg was a major step towards achieving their goal of reuniting the nation and ending the Civil War. The capture of the Mississippi River allowed the Union to control a vital transportation route and further isolate the Confederate States. For the Confederacy, the loss of Vicksburg was a devastating blow. The fall of the city marked the beginning of the end for the Confederate war effort, as it became increasingly difficult for them to maintain their supply lines and communication. The loss of Vicksburg also had a significant impact on Confederate morale, as it demonstrated the growing strength and determination of the Union forces. The siege of Vicksburg was one of the most significant military campaigns of the American Civil War. The Union victory at Vicksburg marked a turning point in the war, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The siege demonstrated the strategic brilliance of General Ulysses S. Grant and the importance of joint operations between the Union Army and Navy. The Siege of Vicksburg, key strategies employed by General Ulysses S. Grant. The Siege of Vicksburg, which took place from May 18 to July 4, 1863, was one of the most significant military campaigns of the American Civil War. The capture of Vicksburg, Mississippi, by Union forces under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant was a turning point in the war, as it gave the Union control over the Mississippi River and effectively split the Confederacy in two. This article will explore the key strategies employed by General Grant during the Siege of Vicksburg, examining the tactical decisions, logistical planning, and leadership that contributed to the Union's success. Background: the strategic importance of Vicksburg. Before delving into the strategies employed by Grant, it is essential to understand the strategic importance of Vicksburg. Located on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, Vicksburg was a critical stronghold for the Confederacy. The city served as a major transportation hub, connecting the eastern and western parts of the Confederacy. Control of Vicksburg meant control of the Mississippi River, which was vital for the movement of troops, supplies, and commerce. For the Union, capturing Vicksburg was a strategic imperative. President Abraham Lincoln recognized the importance of the Mississippi River, famously stating, "See what a lot of land these fellows hold, of which Vicksburg is the key. The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket." The Union's goal was to gain control of the river, thereby isolating the western Confederate states from the rest of the Confederacy and cutting off vital supply lines. Grant's initial challenges. When General Grant assumed command of the Union forces in the Western Theater, He faced several significant challenges in his campaign to capture Vicksburg. Geographical obstacles. Vicksburg's location on a high bluff made it a natural fortress, difficult to assault directly. The surrounding terrain was also challenging, with swamps, bayous, and dense forests that hindered movement and supply lines. Confederate defenses. The Confederates, under the command of Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, had fortified Vicksburg with a series of trenches, artillery batteries, and defensive works. The city was well prepared to withstand a siege. Logistical difficulties. Grant's army faced logistical challenges in maintaining supply lines and transporting troops and equipment through the difficult terrain. The Union Navy, under the command of Admiral David Dixon Porter, played a crucial role in supporting Grant's operations, but coordinating land and naval forces was a complex task. Political pressure. Grant faced pressure from Washington to achieve a swift victory. The Union leadership was eager to see progress in the Western Theater, and Grant's previous attempts to capture Vicksburg had been unsuccessful. Despite these challenges, Grant devised a series of innovative and bold strategies that ultimately led to the fall of Vicksburg. Key strategies employed by Grant. The Bayou expeditions. Testing the waters. One of Grant's first strategies was to explore alternative routes to approach Vicksburg. The direct approach from the north was heavily defended, and the terrain made it difficult to launch a successful assault. Grant ordered a series of expeditions through the bayous and waterways surrounding Vicksburg, hoping to find a viable route to bypass the Confederate defenses. The Yazoo Pass Expedition. In February 1863, Grant authorized the Yazoo Pass Expedition, an attempt to bypass Vicksburg by using the Yazoo River. The plan involved cutting a levee to flood the pass, allowing Union gunboats to navigate through the Yazoo River and approach Vicksburg from the north. However, the expedition faced numerous challenges, including narrow waterways, fallen trees, and Confederate resistance. The Yazoo Pass expedition ultimately failed, but it demonstrated Grant's willingness to explore unconventional approaches. The Steele's Bayou Expedition. Another attempt was the Steele's Bayou Expedition, led by Admiral Porter. This expedition aimed to navigate through the bayous and rivers to the north of Vicksburg, bypassing the Confederate defenses. However, the dense vegetation and narrow waterways made progress slow and difficult. The expedition was eventually abandoned, but it provided valuable intelligence about the terrain and Confederate defenses. The canal digging. A failed attempt in an effort to bypass Vicksburg's defenses, Grant ordered the construction of a canal across the DeSoto Peninsula, opposite Vicksburg. The idea was to divert the Mississippi River, allowing Union gunboats to bypass the city's artillery and approach from the south. Thousands of soldiers and laborers worked on the canal, but the project was plagued by engineering difficulties, flooding, and disease. The canal was ultimately abandoned, but it demonstrated Grant's determination to find a solution to the Vicksburg problem. The turning point. Crossing the Mississippi River. After the failure of the Bayou expeditions and the canal project, Grant decided on a bold and risky strategy: to cross the Mississippi River below Vicksburg and approach the city from the south. This plan required careful coordination between the Union Army and Navy, as well as precise timing to avoid detection by Confederate forces. The running of the batteries. In April 1863, Grant ordered Admiral Porter to run the Confederate batteries at Vicksburg with his fleet of gunboats and transports. This daring maneuver involved sailing past the heavily fortified bluffs under cover of darkness, risking heavy fire from Confederate artillery. Despite the danger, Porter's fleet successfully passed the batteries, losing only one transport in the process. This allowed Grant to establish a supply base on the west bank of the Mississippi River, south of Vicksburg. The crossing at Bruinsburg. With the Navy's support, Grant's army crossed the Mississippi River at Bruinsburg, Mississippi, on April 30, 1863. This crossing was a critical moment in the campaign, as it allowed Grant to move his forces into position to attack Vicksburg from the south. The crossing was executed with precision, and the Union Army quickly established a foothold on the east bank of the river. The Battle of Port Gibson. Securing a foothold. After crossing the Mississippi River, Grant's first objective was to secure a foothold in Mississippi. The Battle of Port Gibson, fought on May 1, 1863, was the first major engagement of the campaign. Grant's forces, under the command of Major General John A. McClernand, defeated the Confederate defenders, securing a critical road junction and opening the way for further advances into the interior of Mississippi. The victory at Port Gibson demonstrated Grant's ability to coordinate large-scale movements and his willingness to take risks. By securing a foothold in Mississippi, Grant was able to move his forces closer to Vicksburg and begin the next phase of the campaign, the Battle of Raymond and the capture of Jackson. With a foothold secured, Grant turned his attention to the Confederate forces in central Mississippi. His next objective was the state capital, Jackson, which was a key supply and communication hub for the Confederacy. Grant's strategy was to isolate Vicksburg by cutting off its supply lines and preventing reinforcements from reaching the city. The Battle of Raymond on May 12, 1863, Grant's forces encountered Confederate troops near Raymond, Mississippi. The Battle of Raymond was a hard-fought engagement, but the Union forces emerged victorious, further weakening the Confederate defenses in the region. The victory at Raymond allowed Grant to continue his advance toward Jackson. The capture of Jackson on May 14, 1863, Grant's forces captured Jackson, Mississippi, after a brief but intense battle. The fall of Jackson was a significant blow to the Confederacy, as it disrupted supply lines and communications between Vicksburg and the rest of the Confederacy. Grant's decision to capture Jackson before turning his attention to Vicksburg was a key strategic move, as it isolated Vicksburg and weakened its defenses. The Battle of Champion Hill, the decisive engagement with Jackson in Union hands, Grant turned his attention to Vicksburg. The next major engagement was the Battle of Champion Hill, fought on May 16, 1863. This battle was the largest and most decisive of the Vicksburg campaign, with both sides committing significant forces to the fight. Grant's strategy at Champion Hill was to outmaneuver the Confederate forces under General Pemberton and cut off their retreat to Vicksburg. The Union forces achieved a decisive victory, forcing Pemberton to retreat toward Vicksburg with heavy losses. The Battle of Champion Hill was a turning point in the campaign, as it left Vicksburg vulnerable to a Union assault. The assaults on Vicksburg, testing the defenses after the victory at Champion Hill, Grant's forces pursued the retreating Confederates and reached the outskirts of Vicksburg. Grant initially attempted to take the city by storm, launching two major assaults on May 19 and May 22, 1863. However, the Confederate defenses were too strong, and the Union forces suffered heavy casualties in both assaults. The first assault, May 19, 1863. The first assault on Vicksburg was launched on May 19, 1863. Grant's forces attacked the Confederate defenses from multiple directions, but the well-entrenched Confederates repelled the Union attacks with heavy losses. The failure of the first assault demonstrated the strength of Vicksburg's defenses and the difficulty of taking the city by direct assault. The second assault, May 22, 1863. Undeterred by the failure of the first assault, Grant ordered a second assault on May 22, 1863. This attack was more coordinated and involved a larger number of troops, but it also ended in failure. The Union forces suffered even heavier casualties, and Grant realized that a direct assault on Vicksburg was not feasible. The Siege of Vicksburg, a war of attrition. After the failure of the assaults, Grant decided to lay siege to Vicksburg. The siege involved surrounding the city, cutting off its supply lines, and bombarding it with artillery until the defenders were forced to surrender. This strategy required patience and careful planning, as Grant had to maintain his supply lines and keep his troops in good condition while waiting for the Confederates to capitulate. Establishing the siege lines. Grant's first task was to establish siege lines around Vicksburg. The Union forces dug a series of trenches and fortifications that encircled the city, cutting off all land routes and preventing the Confederates from receiving reinforcements or supplies. The siege lines were constantly expanded and reinforced, creating a tight noose around Vicksburg. Naval blockade. In addition to the land siege, the Union Navy maintained a blockade on the Mississippi River, preventing any supplies or reinforcements from reaching Vicksburg by water. Admiral Porter's gunboats patrolled the river, shelling Confederate positions and ensuring that no boats could slip through to the city. Artillery bombardment. Grant's artillery played a crucial role in the siege, bombarding Vicksburg day and night. The constant shelling weakened the Confederate defenses and demoralized the defenders. The Union artillery was positioned on high ground, giving it a clear line of sight to the city and allowing it to target key positions with precision. Tunneling and mining. In an effort to breach the Confederate defenses, Union engineers dug tunnels under the Confederate lines and planted explosives. On June 25, 1863, the Union detonated a massive mine under the Confederate fortifications, creating a large crater. However, the subsequent Union assault was repelled, and the breach was quickly sealed by the Confederates. Despite the failure of the mining operation, it demonstrated Grant's willingness to use innovative tactics to break the siege. The surrender of Vicksburg. As the siege dragged on, conditions inside Vicksburg deteriorated rapidly. The Confederate defenders and civilians faced food shortages, disease, and constant bombardment. Morale among the defenders plummeted, and it became clear that further resistance was futile. On July 3, 1863, General Pemberton requested a ceasefire and began negotiations with Grant for the surrender of Vicksburg. After a series of discussions, the terms of surrender were agreed upon, and on July 4, 1863, Pemberton formally surrendered the city to Grant. The surrender of Vicksburg was a major victory for the Union and a devastating blow to the Confederacy. The aftermath, the impact of Vicksburg's fall. The fall of Vicksburg had far-reaching consequences for the Civil War. With the capture of Vicksburg, the Union gained control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The victory also boosted Union morale and demonstrated Grant's strategic brilliance, leading to his promotion to command of all Union armies. For the Confederacy, the loss of Vicksburg was a severe blow. The fall of the city cut off vital supply lines and isolated the western Confederate states from the rest of the Confederacy. The defeat also undermined Confederate morale and marked the beginning of the end for the Southern cause. The Siege of Vicksburg was a complex and multifaceted campaign that showcased General Ulysses S. Grant's strategic genius. Through a combination of bold maneuvers, innovative tactics, and relentless determination, Grant was able to overcome the formidable defenses of Vicksburg and achieve a decisive victory for the Union. The key strategies employed by Grant, ranging from the Bayou expeditions and the crossing of the Mississippi River to the siege and eventual surrender of Vicksburg, demonstrated his ability to adapt to changing circumstances and his unwavering commitment to achieving his objectives. The fall of Vicksburg was a turning point in the Civil War, and it cemented Grant's reputation as one of the greatest military commanders in American history. The lessons learned from the Vicksburg campaign continue to be studied by military strategists and historians, and the legacy of Grant's leadership during the siege remains a testament to the power of perseverance, innovation, and strategic thinking. How did the terrain of Vicksburg influence the outcome of the battle? The Battle of Vicksburg, fought from May 18 to July 4, 1863, was one of the most significant engagements of the American Civil War. It was a pivotal moment in the conflict, as the Union sought to gain control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The terrain of Vicksburg played a crucial role in the outcome of the battle, influencing the strategies, tactics, and ultimately the success of the Union forces under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant. This article will explore in detail how the unique geography and topography of Vicksburg shaped the course of the battle and contributed to the Union's eventual victory. The strategic importance of Vicksburg. The Mississippi River and the Anaconda Plateau. Understand the significance of the terrain at Vicksburg. It is essential to first grasp the strategic importance of the city itself. Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a critical stronghold for the Confederacy during the Civil War. Situated on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, the city was a key point of control for the river, which served as a vital transportation route for both the Union and the Confederacy. The Union strategy, known as the Anaconda Plan, aimed to strangle the Confederacy by blockading its ports and gaining control of the Mississippi River. By doing so, the Union hoped to cut off the Confederacy's access to supplies and reinforcements, effectively isolating the southern states and weakening their ability to wage war. Vicksburg was one of the last major Confederate strongholds on the Mississippi River, and its capture was essential for the Union to achieve its strategic objectives. The city's location on a high bluff made it a formidable defensive position, as it provided a commanding view of the river and allowed Confederate forces to control traffic on the waterway. The Confederate defenses at Vicksburg. The Confederates recognized the strategic importance of Vicksburg and had fortified the city extensively. The natural terrain of the area, combined with man-made defenses, made Vicksburg a challenging target for any attacking force. The city was surrounded by a series of hills, ridges, and ravines, which provided natural barriers to an advancing army. Additionally, the Confederates had constructed a network of trenches, earthworks, and artillery emplacements to further strengthen their defensive position. The terrain around Vicksburg was also characterized by dense forests, swamps, and waterways, which made movement difficult for large armies. The Yazoo River, which flowed to the north of Vicksburg, and the Big Black River, to the east, provided additional natural barriers that the Union forces would have to overcome in their efforts to capture the city. The Union campaign to capture Vicksburg. Early attempts to take Vicksburg. The Union's campaign to capture Vicksburg was a long and arduous process that involved multiple attempts to approach the city from different directions. General Ulysses S. Grant, who was in command of the Union forces in the region, recognized the challenges posed by the terrain and the Confederate defenses. He knew that a direct assault on Vicksburg would be costly and likely unsuccessful, so he sought to find alternative approaches to the city. One of the earliest attempts to capture Vicksburg was made in late 1862, when Grant launched an overland campaign from northern Mississippi. However, the difficult terrain, combined with Confederate resistance, forced Grant to abandon this approach. The Union forces then turned their attention to the Mississippi River, attempting to bypass Vicksburg by digging a canal across a bend in the river. This effort, known as the Grant's Canal, was ultimately unsuccessful due to the challenging terrain and the constant threat of Confederate artillery. The turning point, crossing the Mississippi River south of Vicksburg. After several failed attempts to approach Vicksburg from the north and the west, Grant decided to try a different strategy. In April 1863, he ordered his troops to march down the west bank of the Mississippi River, cross the river south of Vicksburg, and approach the city from the east. This maneuver was risky, as it required the Union forces to move through hostile territory and cross the river under the threat of Confederate attack. The terrain played a crucial role in the success of this operation. The Union forces were able to use the cover of the dense forests and swamps to conceal their movements and avoid detection by Confederate scouts. Additionally, the Union Navy, under the command of Admiral David Dixon Porter, provided crucial support by transporting troops and supplies across the river and providing covering fire against Confederate positions. Once the Union forces had crossed the river, they faced the challenge of moving through the rugged terrain east of Vicksburg. The area was characterized by steep hills, deep ravines, and dense vegetation, which made movement difficult and slowed the Union advance. However, Grant's forces were able to overcome these obstacles and successfully maneuvered into position to attack Vicksburg from the east. The Siege of Vicksburg. The Union encirclement of Vicksburg. By late May 1863, Grant's forces had successfully encircled Vicksburg, cutting off the city from reinforcements and supplies. The Union Army established a series of siege lines around the city, effectively trapping the Confederate defenders inside. The terrain played a crucial role in the success of the Union siege, as the high ground around Vicksburg allowed the Union forces to maintain a commanding position over the city and its defenses. The Confederate defenders, under the command of General John C. Pemberton, were now faced with the daunting task of holding out against the Union siege. The terrain within Vicksburg itself was challenging, as the city was built on a series of steep hills and ridges, which made movement and communication difficult. The Confederate forces were also running low on supplies, as the Union siege had cut off their access to food, ammunition, and other essential resources. The role of terrain in the siege. The terrain of Vicksburg played a significant role in the outcome of the siege. The high ground around the city allowed the Union forces to maintain a constant pressure on the Confederate defenders, as they could easily observe and target Confederate positions from their elevated positions. The Union artillery, positioned on the hills surrounding Vicksburg, was able to bombard the city with relative impunity, causing significant damage to the Confederate defenses and demoralizing the defenders. The rugged terrain within Vicksburg also made it difficult for the Confederate forces to mount an effective defense. The steep hills and ravines made it challenging to move troops and supplies within the city, and the constant Union bombardment made it dangerous to move around. The Confederate defenders were forced to take shelter in caves and dugouts, which provided some protection from the Union artillery but also made it difficult to maintain communication and coordination between different units. The impact of the terrain on the Confederate defenders. The difficult terrain within Vicksburg had a significant impact on the morale and effectiveness of the Confederate defenders. The constant Union bombardment, combined with the lack of supplies and the challenging terrain, took a heavy toll on the Confederate soldiers. Many of the defenders were suffering from hunger, disease, and exhaustion, and the constant threat of Union attack made it difficult for them to rest and recover. The terrain also made it difficult for the Confederate forces to mount a counterattack or break out of the Union siege. The steep hills and dense vegetation around Vicksburg made it challenging to move large numbers of troops, and the Union forces were able to maintain a tight perimeter around the city, preventing any attempts by the Confederates to escape or receive reinforcements. The fall of Vicksburg. The final assault and surrender. By early July 1863, the situation inside Vicksburg had become desperate. The Confederate defenders were running out of food and ammunition, and the constant Union bombardment had caused significant damage to the city's defenses. On July 4, 1863, General Pemberton surrendered Vicksburg to General Grant, marking a significant turning point in the Civil War. The terrain of Vicksburg played a crucial role in the final outcome of the battle. The high ground around the city allowed the Union forces to maintain a constant pressure on the Confederate defenders, while the difficult terrain within Vicksburg made it challenging for the Confederates to mount an effective defense. The Union's ability to use the terrain to their advantage was a key factor in their eventual victory. The aftermath of the battle. The fall of Vicksburg was a major blow to the Confederacy. With the capture of the city, the Union gained control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two and cutting off vital supply lines. The victory at Vicksburg, combined with the Union victory at Gettysburg, which occurred around the same time, marked a turning point in the Civil War and set the stage for the eventual Union victory. The terrain of Vicksburg continued to play a role in the aftermath of the battle. The city's location on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River made it an important strategic point for the Union, and it remained under Union control for the rest of the war. The difficult terrain around Vicksburg also made it challenging for the Confederates to mount any significant counteroffensives in the region, further solidifying the Union's hold on the Mississippi River. The terrain of Vicksburg was a decisive factor in the outcome of the battle. The city's location on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi River made it a formidable defensive position, but it also presented significant challenges for both the Union and Confederate forces. The rugged terrain around Vicksburg, characterized by steep hills, dense forests, and swamps, influenced the strategies and tactics employed by both sides and played a crucial role in the Union's eventual victory. The Union's ability to use the terrain to their advantage, by maneuvering around the Confederate defenses and establishing a siege around the city, was a key factor in their success. The difficult terrain within Vicksburg made it challenging for the Confederate defenders to mount an effective defense, and the constant Union bombardment took a heavy toll on their morale and effectiveness. In the end, the terrain of Vicksburg played a crucial role in shaping the course of the battle and contributed to the Union's eventual victory. The fall of Vicksburg was a significant turning point in the Civil War, and the lessons learned from the battle continue to be studied by military historians and strategists to this day. The terrain of Vicksburg serves as a reminder of the importance of geography and topography in military operations, and the impact that the natural environment can have on the outcome of a battle. The main fortifications used by the Confederates during the Siege of Vicksburg. The Siege of Vicksburg, which took place from May 18 to July 4, 1863, was a pivotal event in the American Civil War. The Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a critical point of control over the Mississippi River, and its capture by Union forces under Major General Ulysses S. Grant was a significant turning point in the war. The Confederates, under the command of Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, employed a series of formidable fortifications to defend the city against the Union siege. These fortifications were a combination of natural terrain features and man-made structures, designed to withstand prolonged bombardment and assault. This article will explore the main fortifications used by the Confederates during the Siege of Vicksburg, examining their construction, strategic importance, and effectiveness in the context of the siege. The strategic importance of Vicksburg. Before delving into the specifics of the Confederate fortifications, it is essential to understand the strategic importance of Vicksburg. The city was located on a high bluff overlooking a bend in the Mississippi River, making it a natural fortress. Control of Vicksburg meant control of the river, which was a vital supply line for the Confederacy. The loss of Vicksburg would effectively split the Confederacy in two, severing communication and supply routes between the eastern and western states. Recognizing the city's importance, the Confederates invested heavily in its defense. The fortifications around Vicksburg were designed to exploit the natural advantages of the terrain while providing maximum protection for the defending forces. These fortifications included a series of interconnected trenches, artillery batteries, and strongpoints that formed a defensive perimeter around the city. The natural defenses of Vicksburg. The natural terrain around Vicksburg played a crucial role in its defense. The city was situated on a series of high bluffs that provided excellent vantage points for artillery and observation. The Mississippi River, which flowed around the city in a wide bend, created a natural moat that made direct assault from the river difficult. Additionally, the surrounding area was characterized by dense forests, swamps, and ravines, which hindered the movement of large bodies of troops and made it challenging for the Union forces to approach the city. The Confederates took full advantage of these natural features, incorporating them into their defensive plans. The bluffs were fortified with artillery emplacements, while the dense vegetation was used to conceal troop movements and defensive positions. The swamps and ravines were also used to channel Union forces into kill zones where they could be targeted by Confederate artillery and infantry. The Confederate defensive perimeter. The Confederate defensive perimeter around Vicksburg was a complex network of fortifications that extended for miles around the city. This perimeter was divided into several sectors, each of which was defended by a combination of infantry, artillery, and engineering works. The main components of the defensive perimeter included the main line of resistance. This was the primary defensive line, consisting of a series of interconnected trenches, rifle pits, and artillery batteries. The main line of resistance was designed to absorb the initial Union assault and provide a fallback position for the defending forces. The outer works. These were a series of forward defenses located outside the main line of resistance. The outer works included picket lines, outposts, and small fortifications designed to delay and disrupt the Union advance. The inner works. These were the final line of defense, located closer to the city itself. The inner works included strongpoints, redoubts, and fortified positions that were designed to hold out even if the outer works were breached. The river defenses. Given the importance of the Mississippi River, the Confederates also constructed a series of fortifications along the riverbanks. These included water batteries, which were artillery emplacements designed to engage Union gunboats and prevent them from approaching the city. The main line of resistance was the backbone of the Confederate defense at Vicksburg. It consisted of a continuous line of trenches and rifle pits that extended for miles around the city. These trenches were dug into the sides of the bluffs, providing excellent cover for the defending troops. The trenches were also reinforced with logs, sandbags, and other materials to provide additional protection against Union artillery fire. The main line of resistance was supported by a series of artillery batteries that were strategically placed to cover the approaches to the city. These batteries were equipped with a variety of artillery pieces, including rifled cannons, smoothbore guns, and mortars. The artillery was used to target Union troops as they advanced, as well as to engage Union gunboats on the river. In addition to the trenches and artillery batteries, the main line of resistance also included a series of strongpoints and redoubts. These were heavily fortified positions that were designed to hold out even if the surrounding trenches were overrun. The strongpoints were typically located at key points along the defensive line, such as road junctions, high ground, and other strategic locations. The outer works were a series of forward defenses located outside the main line of resistance. These defenses were designed to delay and disrupt the Union advance, giving the Confederate forces time to prepare for the main assault. The outer works included picket lines, outposts, and small fortifications that were manned by a combination of infantry and cavalry. The picket lines were the first line of defense, consisting of small groups of soldiers stationed at regular intervals along the perimeter. These pickets were responsible for providing early warning of any Union movement and engaging any enemy forces that approached. The outposts were larger and more heavily fortified than the picket lines, and were typically located at key points along the perimeter. These outposts were designed to hold out against small-scale attacks and provide a fallback position for the pickets. In addition to the picket lines and outposts, the outer works also included a series of small fortifications, such as blockhouses and earthworks. These fortifications were designed to provide cover for the defending troops and slow down the Union advance. The outer works were not intended to hold out against a full-scale assault, but rather to buy time for the main line of resistance to prepare. The inner works were the final line of defense, located closer to the city itself. These works were designed to hold out even if the outer works and main line of resistance were breached. The inner works included a series of strongpoints, redoubts, and fortified positions that were heavily defended by infantry and artillery. The strongpoints were typically located at key points within the city, such as road junctions, high ground, and other strategic locations. These strongpoints were heavily fortified with earthworks, logs, and other materials, and were designed to withstand prolonged bombardment and assault. The redoubts were similar to the strongpoints, but were typically larger and more heavily fortified. These redoubts were designed to serve as fallback positions for the defending forces, and were often equipped with their own artillery. In addition to the strongpoints and redoubts, the inner works also included a series of fortified positions that were designed to provide cover for the defending troops. These positions included rifle pits, trenches, and other earthworks that were dug into the sides of the bluffs. The inner works were the last line of defense, and were designed to hold out until reinforcements could arrive or until the Union forces were forced to withdraw. The river defenses. Given the importance of the Mississippi River, the Confederates also constructed a series of fortifications along the riverbanks. These fortifications were designed to prevent Union gunboats from approaching the city and to provide cover for Confederate vessels operating on the river. The river defenses included a series of water batteries, which were artillery emplacements located along the riverbanks. The water batteries were equipped with a variety of artillery pieces, including rifled cannons, smoothbore guns, and mortars. These batteries were strategically placed to cover the approaches to the city, and were used to engage Union gunboats as they attempted to navigate the river. The water batteries were also supported by a series of obstructions, such as underwater mines and sunken ships, which were designed to block the river and prevent Union vessels from approaching the city. In addition to the water batteries, the river defenses also included a series of fortifications located on the bluffs overlooking the river. These fortifications were equipped with artillery and were used to provide additional cover for the water batteries. The river defenses were a critical component of the Confederate defense at Vicksburg, and played a key role in preventing Union gunboats from approaching the city. The construction of the Confederate fortifications at Vicksburg was a massive undertaking that required the labor of thousands of soldiers and civilians. The fortifications were built using a combination of manual labor and engineering techniques, and were designed to withstand prolonged bombardment and assault. The trenches and rifle pits were dug by hand, using shovels, picks, and other tools. The earth that was removed from the trenches was used to build up the parapets, which were the raised walls of earth that provided cover for the defending troops. The parapets were reinforced with logs, sandbags, and other materials to provide additional protection against Union artillery fire. The artillery batteries were constructed using a combination of earthworks and wooden platforms. The earthworks were built up around the artillery pieces to provide cover for the gunners, while the wooden platforms were used to stabilize the guns and provide a level surface for firing. The artillery batteries were also equipped with ammunition magazines, which were underground storage facilities for the artillery shells and powder. The strongpoints and redoubts were constructed using a combination of earthworks, logs, and other materials. These fortifications were designed to be as strong as possible, and were often reinforced with additional layers of earth and logs. The strongpoints and redoubts were also equipped with their own artillery, which was used to provide additional firepower in the event of an assault. The river defenses were constructed using a combination of earthworks, wooden platforms, and underwater obstructions. The water batteries were built along the riverbanks, and were equipped with artillery pieces that were used to engage Union gunboats. The underwater obstructions, such as mines and sunken ships, were designed to block the river and prevent Union vessels from approaching the city. The effectiveness of the fortifications. The Confederate fortifications at Vicksburg were highly effective in defending the city against the Union siege. The combination of natural terrain features and man-made structures created a formidable defensive perimeter that was difficult for the Union forces to breach. The trenches, artillery batteries, and strongpoints provided excellent cover for the defending troops, while the river defenses prevented Union gunboats from approaching the city. The fortifications were also effective in withstanding prolonged bombardment. The earthworks and parapets provided excellent protection against Union artillery fire, and the strongpoints and redoubts were able to hold out even when the surrounding trenches were overrun. The river defenses were also effective in preventing Union gunboats from approaching the city, and played a key role in the defense of Vicksburg. However, the fortifications were not without their weaknesses. The Confederate forces were heavily outnumbered and outgunned by the Union forces, and the prolonged siege took a heavy toll on the defending troops. The lack of supplies, including food and ammunition, also weakened the Confederate defense and made it difficult for them to hold out against the Union assault. The fall of Vicksburg. Despite the effectiveness of the Confederate fortifications, the prolonged siege eventually took its toll on the defending forces. The Union forces, under the command of Major General Ulysses S. Grant, were able to gradually tighten their grip on the city, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. The Confederate forces, under the command of Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, were eventually forced to surrender on July 4, 1863. The fall of Vicksburg was a significant turning point in the American Civil War. The capture of the city gave the Union control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The loss of Vicksburg also had a demoralizing effect on the Confederate forces, and marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. The Confederate fortifications at Vicksburg were a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the defending forces. The combination of natural terrain features and man-made structures created a formidable defensive perimeter that was able to withstand prolonged bombardment and assault. The trenches, artillery batteries, and strongpoints provided excellent cover for the defending troops, while the river defenses prevented Union gunboats from approaching the city. However, the fortifications were not enough to overcome the overwhelming numerical and material superiority of the Union forces. The prolonged siege eventually took its toll on the defending forces, and the fall of Vicksburg marked a significant turning point in the American Civil War. The capture of the city gave the Union control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two and paving the way for the eventual Union victory. The Siege of Vicksburg remains one of the most studied and analyzed military campaigns in American history. The Confederate fortifications at Vicksburg are a testament to the importance of engineering and terrain in military strategy, and continue to be a subject of interest for historians and military enthusiasts alike. How the Union's naval presence impacted the siege, a turning point in the American Civil War. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a defining moment in United States history, pitting the Union, Northern states, against the Confederacy, Southern states. Among the many factors that contributed to the Union's eventual victory, the Union Navy played a pivotal role, particularly in its ability to enforce blockades, support ground operations, and disrupt Confederate supply lines. This article explores how the Union's naval presence impacted sieges throughout the war, focusing on key battles, strategies, and the broader implications for the conflict. The Union Navy, a strategic advantage at the outset of the Civil War, the Union Navy was relatively small compared to the navies of European powers. However, under the leadership of Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, the Union rapidly expanded its naval capabilities. The Anaconda Plan, devised by General Winfield Scott, outlined a strategy to suffocate the Confederacy by blockading its ports and controlling the Mississippi River. This plan relied heavily on the Union Navy to execute. The Union's naval superiority allowed it to establish a blockade of southern ports, cutting off the Confederacy from vital supplies and international trade. This blockade was not immediately effective, but over time, it severely weakened the Confederate war effort. The Union Navy's ability to enforce this blockade and support ground operations during sieges was a game-changer in the war. Key sieges and naval impact. The Siege of Vicksburg, 1863. The Siege of Vicksburg is one of the most notable examples of the Union Navy's impact on a siege. Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a critical stronghold for the Confederacy, controlling access to the Mississippi River. Capturing Vicksburg would effectively split the Confederacy in two and give the Union control of the river. Admiral David Dixon Porter's fleet played a crucial role in the siege. Union gunboats bombarded Confederate defenses, transported troops, and prevented reinforcements from reaching the city. The naval presence also allowed General Ulysses S. Grant to execute a daring crossing of the Mississippi River, leading to the eventual encirclement and surrender of Vicksburg on July 4, 1863. This victory was a turning point in the war and demonstrated the importance of naval support in siege warfare. The Siege of Port Hudson, 1863. Following the fall of Vicksburg, the Union turned its attention to Port Hudson, Louisiana, the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. The Union Navy, under Admiral Porter, once again provided critical support by bombarding Confederate positions and cutting off supply lines. The siege lasted for 48 days, but the relentless naval and land assault forced the Confederates to surrender on July 9, 1863. With the fall of Port Hudson, the Union gained full control of the Mississippi River, further isolating the Confederacy. The Siege of Charleston, 1863–1865. Charleston, South Carolina, was a symbolic target for the Union due to its role as the birthplace of secession. The Union Navy attempted to capture the city through a combination of naval bombardments and amphibious assaults. Although the siege lasted for nearly 2 years and resulted in heavy Union casualties, the naval blockade effectively cut off Charleston from resupply, weakening its defenses. The city eventually fell to Union forces in February 1865. The role of ironclads and naval innovation. The Union Navy's success during sieges was also due to its adoption of new technologies, particularly ironclad warships. The USS Monitor, for example, revolutionized naval warfare with its rotating turret and iron armor. Ironclads were instrumental in breaking through Confederate defenses and providing fire support during sieges. In addition to ironclads, the Union Navy utilized mortar boats, which were highly effective in bombarding fortified positions. These innovations gave the Union a significant advantage in siege warfare, allowing it to overcome Confederate defenses that would have been impervious to traditional wooden ships. The broader impact of the Union Navy. The Union Navy's impact extended beyond individual sieges. By controlling key waterways and blockading southern ports, the Navy disrupted the Confederate economy and limited its ability to wage war. The lack of supplies and reinforcements weakened Confederate forces on multiple fronts, contributing to the Union's ultimate victory. Moreover, the Union Navy's success in siege operations demonstrated the importance of joint operations between the Army and Navy. The coordination between Admiral Porter and General Grant during the Vicksburg campaign, for example, set a precedent for future military operations. The Union's naval presence was a decisive factor in the outcome of the American Civil War. Through blockades, bombardments, and innovative tactics, the Union Navy played a critical role in sieges such as Vicksburg, Port Hudson, and Charleston. These victories not only secured key strategic objectives but also weakened the Confederacy's ability to sustain its war effort. The Union Navy's contributions during the Civil War underscore the importance of naval power in modern warfare and remain a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the Union forces. The Siege of Vicksburg, a comprehensive analysis of casualties and impact. The Siege of Vicksburg, which took place from May 18 to July 4, 1863, was one of the most significant military campaigns of the American Civil War. This pivotal event not only marked a turning point in the war, but also had profound implications for the future of the United States. The siege culminated in the surrender of the Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg, Mississippi, to Union forces under the command of Major General Ulysses S. Grant. The fall of Vicksburg effectively split the Confederacy in two, giving the Union control over the Mississippi River and severing critical supply lines for the southern states. However, the victory came at a great cost, with significant casualties on both sides. This article delves into the details of the casualties sustained during the siege of Vicksburg, examining the human toll of this brutal conflict and its broader implications. Background: the strategic importance of Vicksburg. To understand the significance of the siege of Vicksburg, it is essential to grasp the strategic importance of the city during the Civil War. Vicksburg, located on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, was a critical stronghold for the Confederacy. Its elevated position on the bluffs overlooking the river made it a formidable defensive position, earning it the nickname the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. Control of Vicksburg meant control of the Mississippi River, which was a vital artery for transportation and communication between the eastern and western parts of the Confederacy. For the Union, capturing Vicksburg was a key objective in their strategy to divide the Confederacy and gain control of the Mississippi River. President Abraham Lincoln recognized the importance of Vicksburg, stating that Vicksburg is the key. The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket. The Union's efforts to capture Vicksburg were part of the broader Anaconda Plan, which aimed to strangle the Confederacy by blockading its ports and controlling the Mississippi River. The road to Vicksburg, prelude to the siege. The campaign to capture Vicksburg was a protracted and complex military operation that involved numerous battles and maneuvers. Major General Ulysses S. Grant, who would later become the commanding general of the Union Army, was tasked with the mission of capturing Vicksburg. Grant's campaign began in late 1862 and involved a series of attempts to approach and assault the city from different directions. One of the early attempts was the Chickasaw Bayou Expedition in December 1862, where Union forces under Major General William T. Sherman attempted to attack Vicksburg from the north. However, the Confederate defenses proved too strong, and the Union forces suffered heavy casualties, forcing them to retreat. Grant then embarked on a series of maneuvers to bypass Vicksburg's defenses. This included digging canals to redirect the Mississippi River, constructing roads through the swamps, and conducting amphibious operations. These efforts were met with mixed success, but they demonstrated Grant's determination and ingenuity in overcoming the challenges posed by the terrain and the Confederate defenses. In April 1863, Grant launched a bold and risky plan to move his army down the west bank of the Mississippi River, cross the river south of Vicksburg, and approach the city from the east. This maneuver, known as the Bayou Crossings, involved a series of battles, including the Battle of Port Gibson, the Battle of Raymond, and the Battle of Jackson. These engagements weakened the Confederate forces and allowed Grant to position his army for the final assault on Vicksburg. The Siege of Vicksburg, beginning by mid-May 1863, Grant's army had successfully encircled Vicksburg, cutting off the city from reinforcements and supplies. The Confederate forces, under the command of Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, were entrenched in the city's defenses, which included a series of forts, trenches, and artillery positions. The stage was set for a protracted siege, with both sides preparing for a long and grueling struggle. The siege officially began on May 18, 1863, when Grant's forces closed in on Vicksburg and began to establish their own defensive positions. The Union Army constructed a series of trenches and earthworks, gradually tightening the noose around the city. The Confederate defenders, meanwhile, were determined to hold out as long as possible, hoping for relief from other Confederate forces or a change in the strategic situation. The human cost, casualties on both sides. The siege of Vicksburg was a brutal and bloody conflict, with significant casualties on both sides. The human cost of the siege was immense, with thousands of soldiers and civilians losing their lives or suffering from wounds, disease, and starvation. This section provides a detailed analysis of the casualties sustained by both the Union and Confederate forces during the siege. Union casualties. The Union forces under General Grant suffered significant casualties during the siege of Vicksburg. The exact number of Union casualties is difficult to determine with precision, as records from the time are often incomplete or inconsistent. However, estimates suggest that the Union Army suffered approximately 4,800 casualties during the siege, including killed, wounded, and missing. Killed in action. The number of Union soldiers killed in action during the siege of Vicksburg is estimated to be around 1,000. These fatalities occurred during various engagements, including the initial assaults on the Confederate defenses, skirmishes, and artillery duels. The Union soldiers faced fierce resistance from the Confederate defenders, who were well entrenched and determined to hold their positions. Wounded in action. The number of Union soldiers wounded during the siege is estimated to be around 3,000. The wounded included those who suffered from gunshot wounds, artillery shrapnel, and other injuries sustained during the fighting. The conditions during the siege were harsh, with limited medical facilities and supplies, which exacerbated the suffering of the wounded. Missing in action. The number of Union soldiers reported as missing during the siege is estimated to be around 800. These missing soldiers included those who were captured by the Confederate forces, as well as those who deserted or were unaccounted for during the chaos of battle. The fate of many of these missing soldiers remains unknown. Confederate casualties. The Confederate forces under General Pemberton also suffered significant casualties during the siege of Vicksburg. The exact number of Confederate casualties is similarly difficult to determine, but estimates suggest that the Confederate Army suffered approximately 3,200 casualties during the siege, including killed, wounded, and missing. Killed in action. The number of Confederate soldiers killed in action during the siege of Vicksburg is estimated to be around 800. These fatalities occurred during the Union assaults, as well as during skirmishes and artillery exchanges. The Confederate defenders fought valiantly, but they were ultimately overwhelmed by the superior numbers and resources of the Union forces. Wounded in action. The number of Confederate soldiers wounded during the siege is estimated to be around 2,000. The wounded included those who suffered from gunshot wounds, artillery shrapnel, and other injuries sustained during the fighting. The Confederate medical facilities were even more limited than those of the Union, and many of the wounded suffered greatly due to the lack of proper care. Missing in action. The number of Confederate soldiers reported as missing during the siege is estimated to be around 400. These missing soldiers included those who were captured by the Union forces, as well as those who deserted or were unaccounted for during the chaos of battle. The fate of many of these missing soldiers remains unknown. Civilian casualties. In addition to the military casualties, the siege of Vicksburg also took a heavy toll on the civilian population of the city. The civilians of Vicksburg endured immense suffering during the siege, as they were cut off from supplies and subjected to constant bombardment by Union artillery. Deaths from starvation and disease. The civilian population of Vicksburg faced severe shortages of food and medical supplies during the siege. Many civilians died from starvation, malnutrition, and disease. The exact number of civilian deaths is difficult to determine, but estimates suggest that hundreds of civilians perished during the siege. Deaths from artillery bombardment. The Union artillery bombardment of Vicksburg was relentless, with thousands of shells raining down on the city. Many civilians were killed or injured by the artillery fire, which destroyed homes, buildings, and infrastructure. The psychological toll of the constant bombardment was also immense, as the civilians lived in constant fear for their lives. The surrender of Vicksburg. After 47 days of siege, the Confederate forces in Vicksburg were on the brink of collapse. The defenders were exhausted, starving, and running out of ammunition. On July 3, 1863, General Pemberton requested a ceasefire to discuss terms of surrender with General Grant. The two commanders met on the following day, and Pemberton agreed to surrender the city. The formal surrender took place on July 4, 1863, coinciding with the United States Independence Day. The Union forces marched into Vicksburg and took control of the city, marking a significant victory for the Union and a devastating blow to the Confederacy. Aftermath and impact. The fall of Vicksburg had far-reaching consequences for the course of the Civil War. The Union's control of the Mississippi River effectively split the Confederacy in two, isolating the western states from the eastern states. This strategic victory, combined with the Union's victory at the Battle of Gettysburg, which also concluded on July 4, 1863, marked a turning point in the war. The casualties sustained during the siege of Vicksburg were a stark reminder of the human cost of the Civil War. The suffering endured by the soldiers and civilians of Vicksburg was immense, and the scars of the siege would linger for generations. Impact on the Union. For the Union, the capture of Vicksburg was a major morale boost and a significant strategic victory. It demonstrated the effectiveness of General Grant's leadership and solidified his reputation as one of the Union's most capable commanders. The victory also bolstered President Lincoln's confidence in Grant, leading to his eventual promotion to overall command of the Union Army. The control of the Mississippi River allowed the Union to disrupt Confederate supply lines and hinder their ability to move troops and resources. This strategic advantage played a crucial role in the Union's eventual victory in the Civil War. Impact on the Confederacy. For the Confederacy, the loss of Vicksburg was a devastating blow. The surrender of the city and the loss of control over the Mississippi River severely weakened the Confederate war effort. The isolation of the western states from the eastern states made it increasingly difficult for the Confederacy to coordinate its defenses and maintain its supply lines. The fall of Vicksburg also had a demoralizing effect on the Confederate population and military. The realization that the Union could penetrate deep into Confederate territory and capture key strongholds undermined confidence in the Confederate leadership and the prospects for ultimate victory. Long-term consequences. The siege of Vicksburg had long-term consequences for both the Union and the Confederacy. For the Union, the victory at Vicksburg was a crucial step towards the eventual reunification of the country. It demonstrated the Union's ability to execute complex military operations and achieve strategic objectives, paving the way for further successes in the war. For the Confederacy, the loss of Vicksburg marked the beginning of a downward spiral. The inability to defend key territories and maintain control over critical supply lines weakened the Confederate war effort and contributed to the eventual collapse of the Confederacy. Conclusion: the Siege of Vicksburg was a pivotal event in the American Civil War, with significant casualties on both sides. The human cost of the siege was immense, with thousands of soldiers and civilians losing their lives or suffering from wounds, disease, and starvation. The fall of Vicksburg marked a turning point in the war, giving the Union control over the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. The sacrifices made by the soldiers and civilians of Vicksburg are a testament to the brutality and devastation of the Civil War. The siege serves as a reminder of the human toll of war and the importance of understanding the complexities and consequences of military conflicts. As we reflect on the Siege of Vicksburg and its impact, it is essential to remember the individuals who endured the hardships and sacrifices of this brutal conflict. Their stories and experiences provide valuable insights into the human cost of war and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Vicksburg's defenses, the Gibraltar of the Confederacy.